In assignment 5.2, the first few questions that you see will be the most familiar. They're going to be based on graphs that you were just practicing in assignment 5.1. So for instance, in this case, it tells us that we are seeing the graph now of f of x equals the absolute value of x, which hopefully we already knew that it would come out looking like a v. But what it's asking us to do is to graph f of x plus 3. And so we have to be able to use this function notation here in order to be able to know what it's doing to it. So notice the plus 3 is outside of the parentheses. It's at the end of f of x. So in other words, we're figuring out what f of x is, and then we add 3. All right, what that means then is that we're going to be shifting the entire original graph up 3 units. Anytime that number is added or subtracted on the very end like that, it's moving it up and down. All right, so basically what I need to do then in this problem is just replicate this graph, except 3 units higher than it was. Step 1, grab the right tool from all of these down here. I've given you tons and tons of options here, mostly because, well, one, you're going to be seeing basically all of those come up at some point or another, and two, because I want you used to checking to see which shape of graph it really is. This particular one, of course, is absolute value, and so it's going to be that V-shaped graph. So you're going to want to click on that first, and then we're going to draw our V starting up 3. So instead of our first point being at 0, our first point is up at 3. I plot that first point, and then as I drag it around, I'm moving the graph from there. The absolute value graph goes up 1 over 1. So just putting it over 1 up 1 is a great spot to put it. But of course, you could put it over 2 up 2 or over 3 up 3, whatever you wanted. But you only need to plot that first point, the vertex, and then just one other point after that. Now our graph is made, and then I can submit it. And then I go on to my next question, and it looks very similar. Mine, again, is starting off with the absolute value graph, and this time it's asking me to graph f of x plus 5. And notice in this notation that the x plus 5 is all inside the parentheses. When you have something added or subtracted inside the parentheses, that is inside with x, it means it moves it in the x direction. The tricky part is that we need to remember is that anytime it moves it in the x direction, it moves it in the opposite direction than your instincts might tell you. Plus 5 is actually going to go to the left 5 units, not to the right. So we are basically going to be making the exact same graph that we see up above our absolute value graph, just starting left 5 instead. So I grab my absolute value graph from the toolbar below, and then I go left 5 to put my first point in, and then of course we're going up 1 over 1 on both sides. Put the point anywhere that is actually going to keep that ratio the same. There we go. And there's my graph. I can now go ahead and submit it from there. Now on to question number 3 out of my assignment. In this case, I'm starting with f of x equaling x squared. And it's again showing the graph of what x squared looks like. And so then, in this case, it's asking me to graph f of x minus 1. Again, the minus 1 is hanging on the end. It's written after the f of x, not inside the parentheses, so that means it's going to be moving it up and down. Minus does indeed move it down. And so I'm going to be making the exact same graph as what I see up above here, except that I'm going to be starting at down 1. So notice this one starts at 0, 0, so I'm going to be starting down 1 instead. First thing I need to do, though, is I do need to pick which graph I'm going to be using. You might be tempted to think that there's 2 different options here, because both of those are parabolas. The difference is that the x squared function opens up or opens down. It's got to be either this or it's got to be either this. You will never see x squared opening sideways, and so it will not be that one. So now that I've figured out which graph to use, I'm going to go ahead and start down 1. And then having plotted that point, I now need to plot one more point. And so I can drag around. Of course, I'm moving the whole thing. And my parabola here goes over 1 up 1 for the first point. And so that's one that I often like to use, is go over 1 up 1. And there is my graph. And so notice this is indeed the same thing as what we had up there, except move down 1, because that's what that function notation told us to do. And so that one is now done and ready for submission. And then I head on to the next question, which is another quadratic. This is getting familiar. That's good. In this case, though, notice that what we are graphing is f of x minus 6. Notice that the minus 6 is inside the parentheses. And since it is inside with the x, it is going to be moving it in the x direction. Remember, minus actually moves it to the right. And so this is going to be the exact same graph except shifted to the right 6 units. So I'm going to start by going ahead and grabbing my parabola tool, because remember this was x squared. And so I grab the parabola tool, and then I'm going to go right 6 to plot my first point. And then I drag it up, and I can go over 1 up 1, or I could go over 2 up 4, wherever I want to plot that next point, as long as it is indeed on that parabola, and then go ahead and submit it from there. And then I head on to my next question, my number 5, and this time it's square root that we're going to be dealing with. And you see the square root equation is given at the top, and then it shows us what the square root graph looks like. Okay, great. And then it tells us that we're going to be graphing f of x plus 6. And notice that the plus 6 is at the end. It's not inside the parentheses with the x, which means that it is moving it up and down. And so first thing we want to do, go grab the right tool. Remember, you're looking for the tool that looks like that. And there's only one of them that truly fits that requirement, which is this one right here. If you're looking at the one next to it thinking, well, that one looks kind of similar, it does look kind of similar, except it has something on both sides. And remember, square root doesn't have anything to the left of that first point. And so this is the one we're going to use for our square root. Now that I've selected my square root graph, my f of x here is plus 6. That plus 6 hanging on the end moves it up 6. So I put my first point up 6. And then our square root, it goes over 1 up 1, or over 4 up 2, or over 9 up 3. You can pick any of those you want as the place where you put your next point. But pick one, plot the second point there, and then you're done. Go ahead and submit it from there. And then we reach number 6 on my assignment, which is the last one I'm going to go through in this particular video. And in this one, again, we're starting with square root, and it gives us what the square root graph looks like. And then it tells us that we're going to be graphing f of x plus 3. And notice here that the x plus 3 is all inside the parentheses. So I'm adding the 3 directly to x, which makes the whole graph move in the x direction. We just have to remember that plus actually means left. So we're going to be going left 3 on this one. So go ahead and grab your square root tool down at the bottom there. And then instead of starting at 0, 0, we're going to go left 3 and put our first point right there. From that point, I make the same old square root graph as what you saw up above. And so there is our final graph.